what Wordsworth gets from nature is a peace that is transcendent and can return to him years later just by thinking about walks in the countryside with his sister years before. So nature is benevolent, it's positive, it's sublime. I would also say it's Janus-based often for the Romantics. The Romantics are positive on nature, but sometimes nature can turn around and bite you. And so nature can also be windswept mountainsides and heaving ocean waves, Jericho sort of wave, raft from Medusa, giant boiling ocean. That's something that's beautiful and sublime, but it's also something that can be dangerous. Actually, I point out in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, it ends actually, you see nature in a very positive way when Victor's sort of hiding in it. But the novel actually ends with a race across the frozen ice packs as Frankenstein pursues his monster. And here nature is foreboding and evil. I don't know if it's evil, but it is certainly something to be a little scared of. So for the Romantics, they tend to have a very positive view of nature. And this is coming out of Rousseau. I think what's important that Rousseau, I mean, a lot of people like nature. Rousseau is not the first intellectual to extol the virtues of nature. One thing he says that is, if not unique, has certainly not been enunciated quite the same way before, is that Rousseau puts forward the idea of the noble savage, right? That people are at their best when they are closest to nature. Those peoples who are least urbanized, least sort of gentrified, are the most authentic, they're the purest, and we can expect them to be morally superior, more upright. And so we see with Rousseau and with the 19th century, this attitude that those people who are closest to nature are in some way special. One place he says children, I like this painting, he says got happy peasants, it also has happy children. And being a kid for the first several thousand years of the Western experience is really like being a little adult. Once you're big enough, you go out and you work in the fields. And there was no FAO Schwartz. Childhood, not that great. And so in the 19th century, there's the idea that childhood is a special time, that it should be sort of lyrical, and that there's an innocence and some sort of moral uprightness to kids. I have kids not like that at all. But for the Romantics, they are. So the Romantics, they go, and if you've read William Wordsworth's We Are Seven, he meets a little girl who half her siblings are dead. He says, we are seven. And half of them are dead. She says, no, they're dead. But she's pure. She's able to see things in a real spiritual sort of way that refuses to accept that they're really dead. They're still there with her. Right? So there is a sort of a poetry to that. Right? So children are elevated, but so are peasants. Right? Peasants are closer to the original way we live. They're closer to that noble savage. And very frequently in Romantic literature, they're held up. In fact, I just go back to Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. The Frankenstein monster does actually live for a while with some peasants. And they're perfect. They're wonderful to them. And they read Goethe, which is unlike any of the peasants I've ever heard of. But the peasants here are held up. Right? And there's a certain lyricism, I think, due to their connection with nature. It's actually the term to romanticize has actually entered our lexicon. And when we say that you romanticize something, it tends to often be sort of negative. We romanticize Jesse James, really sort of a dirty dog, but it's exciting, and so we can turn him into a good guy, right? So to romanticize sort of has come in English to mean to sort of whitewash, make it more attractive, make it tell a better story. I like this picture because Arbas is a Hungarian painter, but I like the peasants. Their whites are white, and I'm sure if they smiled, their teeth would be perfect. Probably not. I mean, in romantic depictions of the common folk, they don't seem to pay attention to the hardships or the unsightly parts of being a traditional farmer. You know? Instead, we tend to elevate and sort of idolize. Some of that is, I think, because of these Rousseauian ideas. I think another thing that's going on, which we'll talk about a little more in a second, is that the peasant culture is often identified with the national identity. One thing that's happening in the 19th century, and it's actually begun before the 19th century, but we're seeing a lot of sort of homogenization and sort of a cosmopolitan tendency across Europe. One thing you see is that there's a lot of commonality in the cities. Right? So you go to the cities and you find people speaking the dominant language. This happens all over Europe. Not everywhere, but it happens all over Europe. If you go to Edinburgh and Glasgow, you will find people speaking English, dressing as Englishmen. But if you go up to the Northern Highlands, you go to the Hebrides, you can find people speaking Scottish Gaelic and wearing the traditional costume. So what you find is in the cities, everything's becoming sort of homogenized, it's becoming the same. And this happens across Europe, maybe most extreme in Russia in the early 19th century, where the landowners, the aristocracy, are dressing in Western style, speaking French to the point that many of them can't speak Russian to speak with their own people. And the peasants are wearing traditional costumes and speaking the traditional language. So it's happening all over Europe that these sort of the old local cultures are in fact in danger. And one thing that's interesting in this period is how many languages disappear. We'll see in the 19th century, you see these revivals in Poland and Ireland, places where ethnic groups rise up and sort of declare themselves nations and redraw the maps. But there are plenty of little folk languages that vanish. Cornish in England, Piedmontese in northern Italy. Not everybody who has a language and a culture gets to become a country. But I think part of what we're seeing is the peasants are the ones that have the distinctive costumes, that have the distinctive songs. Right? If you want to find the most Polish people, right, maybe you can find them in the peasantry. If you want to find the most Irish people, you can find them in the peasantry. They're the ones least affected by this sort of giant homogenization that's going on. So the Romantics tend to go look at the peasants and see them in a very positive light.